Well, welcome everyone to Exopolitics Today, the week in review. So we're going to be covering my Twitter feed that brings all of the major exopolitics stories that I've been able to detect or that I think are very important to follow up as far as exopolitics research is concerned.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
So last week we began with the very first episode, and we covered that in this video that came out on June 10, the week in review. That's the inaugural episode. The next day on Sunday, my interview with JP, who is the US Army whistleblower that I've been working with for 18 years now, since 2008. Sorry, that's 15 years. My math is not so good. So 15 years now, since 2008. He's now currently in the US Army. He's active, and I wrote a book about him, and I got to talk about that on Coast to Coast AM. So you can listen to that on YouTube. Just go to this particular URL and you will get to hear that interview on JP. So definitely worth taking a listen if you just want to get a kind of succinct overview of JP's testimony. Let's see. So let's go to June 11. June 11, I thought this map from RT showing a three-pronged attack by Ukraine's army around Kherson was very significant, because what the attack formation showed, this was an attack that happened apparently just before the dam, that major hydroelectric dam there, the Kakhovskaya Dam, was blown up through some Ukrainian action. And so you can see in this map here that there's this kind of three-pronged attack that was expected by the Ukrainians, or conducted. I'm not quite sure whether it was forecasting or whether it was reporting on the attacks that occurred just before the dam blew. But in either case, I thought it was very significant that one of these attacks showed that the Ukrainians were attacking and bringing their forces right to the edge of this kind of like area here in the Kherson Oblast or region, just next to Kherson City. I think it's about 20 miles away from Kherson City. This is called Oleshky Sands National Nature Park. And it is a barren desert there in Ukraine. And I've had two sources, JP and Elena Danan, report that beneath this is a space ark. And so that's very significant, because it's telling us that a major factor in the Ukraine war was this desire to get control over territory where there was a space ark buried. So that's quite a significant story and explanation for why the Ukraine war has been conducted. So here's the actual story on RT that shows the above graphic and explains how the lowering of the Dnieper River would aim Ukraine in lines of attacks that include Oleshky Sands. So at the 4.45 minute mark, and I think it's worth kind of just taking a brief look at that. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at that.
Hydropower plant.
Let's see how they describe it. Here we go.
Be beneficial for Ukrainian forces, and here's why. The potential flooding on the lower left bank in the Kherson region, where Russian armed forces are stationed, would eventually shallow the Dnieper River, which would then enable Ukraine to land forces in Energodar and carry out a counter-offensive.
Okay, so there you have it. So they're projecting what would happen with Ukraine lowering the Dnieper River and allowing them to attack, and that attack would encompass the Oleshki Sands National Nature Park. Very interesting. I mean, this is circumstantial evidence, if you like, that there is something there at Oleshki Sands that the Ukrainians want to get control of. Space ark? Well, we definitely need more information. This is the big story from last week. And this is the David Grusch whistleblower testimony that has been dominating the airwaves for the last couple of weeks. And I did mention him in my last week in review. So just to kind of recap, David Grusch is a senior whistleblower who was a liaison for the NRO and the Geospatial Agency, two different UAP bodies or UFO investigations conducted by the Pentagon. And he was reporting in to the director and to the office of ARROW, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. The director is Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. He was reporting that he was hearing from credible whistleblowers that there were alien spacecraft that had been recovered and were being secretly reverse engineered. Now, clearly, that would be of interest to the ARROW office. So Grusch had reported that to the ARROW office, and he then found out that nothing was being done. And so that's when he decided to become a whistleblower, because he felt that this was the way to get that information out. So this was an interview of David Grusch. And let's just watch the beginning of that.
Ross, incredible interview. We checked into David Grusch's credentials. We did our own due diligence here at News Nation. All of his credentials stack up, but there's nothing like actually sitting down with someone, looking them in the eye for hours face to face to really get a read on them. Why do you say that David Grusch is so believable here?
Look, the most persuasive thing for me is the simple fact that I was introduced to Mr. Grusch by people who told me about him from within the legacy UAP crash retrieval program. I wrote a book about this subject a couple of years ago, and because of the contacts that I made in the course of researching that book, I became aware of the existence of the crash retrieval program, and I became aware of the existence of Mr. Grusch, who was basically conducting his investigations for the UAP task force. I've known about him for some time, and many people have vouched for his credibility, and indeed I've heard nothing but good about him.
Okay, so that's the great David Grusch testimony, and that's an Australian reporter, Ross Coulthart, and he was able to confirm that these reverse engineering programs happening in corporate facilities are real. And of course, if you've been following Exopolitics, we've been reporting on that for a couple of decades now. That's long been known in UFO circles that there have been secret reverse engineering programs. And so it's really great to see that the mainstream public is now talking about this, that they've gone beyond that first level approach that, there are these lights in the sky, or there are these craft that are being captured on film, and we're getting photographs of them, and, what are they? And speculate. Now we get to the next level that, okay, credible whistleblowers are saying that these craft have been captured and are now currently being reverse engineered in corporate laboratories. So David Grusch's testimony is very significant because he also, what it tells us is that his testimony, along with the testimony of several others, has been reported not only to the Arrow office, but also to the Congress, to the US Congress, which explains why the Congress has been proactive in setting up a UAP office or UFO office after 60 years of inaction on that issue. Now, all of a sudden, Congress is wanting to hold hearings and have regular reports, and passed, of course, significant whistleblower protection in the National Defense Authorization Act for 2023, which allows people like Grusch to come forward, presumably without being punished. Now, one of the things about this interview that David Grusch did on Sunday, June 12, on News Nation, was that it became clear that he believes that UAPs are a national security threat, that he is part of that group that are proposing that these UAPs are a threat. And that kind of like gives us a big clue into the motivation and why Grusch is being allowed to come forward. I mean, it's clear that he's being allowed to come forward. So, there are those that say, Grusch is a part of a limited hangout and really trying to kind of like get people to buy into this narrative that UAPs are a national security threat. And of course, that sets up what could be a future emergency, public emergency, national emergency concerning UAPs. And that's kind of very interesting because, a lot of people assume that the false flag alien invasion is going to be something that would be clearly an attack, but it may be just hyping up UFOs and anything that appears in the sky as a public emergency. So, presumably, let's look at it. Just imagine some big mothership shows up, a space ark shows up over a major city or over several cities. Now, you don't have the motherships, the arks, attacking Earth, but what you have is they're there, they're hovering. And the government says it's a national security threat. It's a public emergency. So the newspapers hype the threat posed by these UAPs. And so I think David Grusch's testimony kind of like does open that possibility up. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, June 12. Okay, so over the weekend of June 10 and 11, Stephen Greer did his Disclosure Project conference somewhere near the National Press Club, and on Monday, June 12, he did the repeat of the National Press Club that was first held in May of 2001. So in this case, he had a total of 6 whistleblowers. He said 5, but there was an actual sixth one that turned up at the conference, at the press club conference. So he presented a total of 6 whistleblowers with first-hand experience. Well, 5 of them had first-hand experience of UAPs, UFOs. The sixth one talked about a neutrino detection facility in Antarctica and why he believed that neutrino detection facility was part of a directed energy weapons array out of Antarctica. Important story. But there were 5 whistleblowers that actually had first-hand experiences concerning UAPs, UFOs. And what I found really significant about their testimonies was that they talked about their experiences. They talked about what happened to them after they saw the UFOs, the UAPs. And what they described was that there was a process whereby they were punished because they weren't read in. So these are 5 whistleblowers, insiders, that weren't read into the programs, weren't read into these highly classified, compartmented programs dealing with extraterrestrial life or technologies, that these were people that were just kind of like in the wrong place at the wrong time, or saw craft while they were piloting some experimental craft. And so they describe various ways in which they were retaliated against. So that's a very significant thing, that we get to hear how people who are not read into the programs are retaliated against once their testimony, their testimony didn't even go out public. It was just the fact that they saw these devices and they shouldn't have, and so they were retaliated against in, very, very badly in some cases. So that's what Greer's Disclosure Project press conference discussed. Okay, so now let's move to another story on June 12. Elena Danan's latest update from the Galactic Federation of Worlds shows how the deep state is using whistleblowers to create a false narrative that UFOs are a threat. And the goal is to counter the truth about positive extraterrestrials helping us birth a galactic civilization. She also reports that all malevolent extraterrestrials have left our solar system, so any reptilian, Orion Greys, ETs seen by witnesses are holograms, synthetic life forms, etc. She also asserts that there will be no real alien invasion, but the deep state hopes to manipulate the general public by creating fear about such a possibility. Well, I think that she is correct that there is a false narrative that UFOs are a threat, that the negative extraterrestrials, now we're talking about the fleets, we're talking about the force that they commanded, and they have left our solar system. And, that's a big kind of debating point. There are people out there that are saying, no, the UFOs are still here, the negative extraterrestrials are still here, that it's hopium to say that they have left. Now, I think that, I have talked about this over the last year, and there are a number of independent sources that talk about this. Now, one of those sources is a Navy insider who is independent to the sources that I've been working with, whether it's Elena Danan, JP, Jean-Charles Moyen. This source operates out of the Arlington Institute. And he came forward and he said that he had 3 independent sources verifying to him that negative extraterrestrials have left and positive extraterrestrials are remaining. Now, why would that be? I believe it's because you had the incursion of the Cedar fleets. You had the incursion of these 24 advanced top-tier extraterrestrial civilizations that have been involved in seeding humanity, not just in the Milky Way galaxy, but in many different galaxies. They have recently arrived. This group of 24 extraterrestrials, their arrival was discussed as early as the 1970s. And so now they have arrived. And because they have arrived, a whole sequence of events have been set off, which include then releasing probes, thousands of probes, and they're monitoring everything. Now, the dark likes to operate in the shadows. So negative extraterrestrials, their fleets like to operate in the shadows. Now, with the arrival of these galactics, and the whole galactic kind of like show is now on, the negative extraterrestrial fleets, the Draconians, the Orions, have left our solar system because they don't want to be recorded. Why would they want to be recorded? Because they are naturally aggressors. They have been manipulating and violating human rights for centuries, thousands of years. So they have left, but they have left behind fifth columnists. They have they have left behind infiltrators, and some of their personnel are still around, hiding in the shadows or being able to come in through the different portals, because our solar system, planets, Earth, are connected in an extensive portal system. So there's many ways that you can have a few extraterrestrials, negative extraterrestrials, slipping through, doing, creating a lot of mischief here and there. And it's hard to track them, because that's how they like to operate, in the shadows. But the fleets, we're talking about the fleets of the Draconians, the Orions, the Dark Fleet itself have left. And that's the important takeaway here. Okay, so that's Elena Danan's update. Okay, so I did a interview with John Vivanco, and he discussed remote viewing and how he's been able to gather accurate intelligence on various projects of interest to him and of interest to the intelligence community. Now, what I found very interesting of John Vivanco, he's got a series on Rise TV, formerly The Edge of Wonder, called the Chronicles of a Psychic Spy. Definitely worth tuning into that. Now, what I found very interesting about his background was that he was involved in remote viewing in the late 1990s. He got to work with a very talented remote viewer, and they set up a remote viewing company, and they were so accurate that company was very quickly shut down, and that the CEO of that company, she was targeted. And so that was because there are people that do not want the remote viewing data from getting out. They do not want talented remote viewers getting information on what is happening. Now, I think remote viewing is a very important tool for gathering independent information on exopolitics topics. Now, I typically have been working with exopolitics whistleblowers, people who have been involved in secret space programs or involved in crash retrieval operation, or contactees, people who have had direct interactions with extraterrestrials themselves. Those are the groups I've worked with the most. I've also gotten to work very closely with Dr. Robert Wood and his son Ryan Wood on the Majestic documents, which are leaked official documents that have not been acknowledged by the various intelligence agencies. But these Majestic documents are very, very important for gathering intel on what's going on, getting an idea of the big picture of what is going on. You also have FOIA documents, Freedom of Information Act documents that come out, which are not nearly as revealing and detailed about the extraterrestrial presence and various reverse engineering projects as the leaked Majestic documents. Nevertheless, the FOIA documents help us kind of like cross the T's and dot the I's. They give us, those little bits of information that confirm some of the Majestic documents. So remote viewing is like another means, another source of information that kind of like gives us a way of understanding what is going on. So that remote viewing that John Vivanco has done definitely, I think, is a very important tool for gathering accurate civilian intelligence. Now, this is where we need to distinguish between remote viewing done using blind protocols, where you have no front loading by the remote viewers, and what a lot of people claim to be doing in terms of remote viewing. There's a lot of people that say, well, hang on, let me remote view that. They're talking about some event, like just say we're talking about a dumb underground base somewhere in Europe that's doing some kind of trafficking in illicit goods, and it's like, oh, let me review that. And I say, oh yeah, I remote viewed that, and this is what's going on. Well, that's a classic case of front loading, where the the remote viewer knows the target, in this case, say a dumb facility somewhere in Europe involved in trafficking of illicit goods. And so they will then proceed to tell you. And yeah, no doubt, people who do that have some psychic abilities. And I think that normally that would give us some kind of like interesting intel. But if you're trying to do that kind of remote viewing, you're going to have a lot of front loading. You're going to have your own subjective biases coming in and filtering that. So, if, for example, you believe that, there's a lot of kind of like illicit trafficking of all sorts of things that are being passed through these dumb facilities, and so then you'll remote view that, and so you'll be front loading because you're already predisposed to believe that that these dumb facilities are involved in illicit activities. But when you have blind remote viewing, you don't know the target. You don't, and that way your subjective beliefs don't interfere and kind of like taint the results. So this is, I think, a very important tool, independent tool without front loading. So remote viewing, definitely worth following up. Okay, so here's another story on June 12th. And here we have Space Force is setting up a multinational alliance to protect space activities and assets. Such an alliance has secretly existed for decades, but now it is being white-walled for a Star Trek future. Which would be like a Starfleet. So this is a story, US Space Force in talks with allies about how to jointly protect space assets. So here's that story in Space News. And here you have Space Force talking with various allies. Now, and we're talking about missions, collaborating with Space Force to protect space for kind of allied operations. So currently there are 25 nations that have signed up to the Artemis Accords. And these 25 nations are all in, it's actually 24 nations plus the United States. And those 24 nations have signed bilateral accords, the Artemis Accords, with the United States. So those are civilian space programs that are part of the Artemis Accords. Now you have the same thing happening as far as Space Force and the Space Commands, because they are building up this multinational space alliance. And this is very important because the future is one where there is going to be much more coordination at a global level when it comes to space operations. And where you actually have extraterrestrials out there, it's going to be even more important for that coordination to lead to some kind of coherent, unified, or cooperative space alliance. And this is what the United States is building. Now, in 2021, I reported on the Jupiter Accords. And what was said in the Jupiter Accords, and I talked about that in my book, Galactic Federations, Councils, and Secret Space Programs. I talked at length about that multinational delegation that was sent to the upper atmosphere of Jupiter that talked about how Earth is going to coalesce or cooperate and work with extraterrestrials, because these CEDA extraterrestrials, the 24 extraterrestrial civilizations that came in, have said, okay, Earth is now going to step up and take control of your entire solar system. So what we want is for you to operate under a kind of unitary or a unified planetary leadership. And it was decided that the United States Space Command will be the lead agency. So that's why it's very important, these developments like Space Force setting up joint agreements with the equivalent space forces or space commands in different nations, and why the Artemis Accords are so significant. Because I think the future is one where we will be moving into this Star Trek, Starfleet kind of future. that Star Trek was not just a fictional creation of Gene Roddenberry in the 1960s. I think Roddenberry was read in or even exposed directly himself to the future space program, where Space Force, Space Command would be cooperating with extraterrestrials in the future. And because space-time technologies enable them to travel back and forth in time, I think it's very possible, and I talked about that in my book, Space Force, Our Star Trek Future. I think it was very possible, and I actually give you examples and justifications for why Roddenberry or someone close to him like Leslie Stevens IV, who was part of Army intelligence and worked with US Navy intelligence, his father was a vice admiral, was taken into the future or was read in to this future where Earth is part of this kind of like galactic federation, something like what was described in Star Trek, the Federation of Planets, that is happening. And so I think Space Force and US Space Commands and the Artemis Accords are very important indicators of us moving towards this Space Force future. So that's why I track the developments as far as them reaching new agreements with different national partners. Okay, so that's Space Force. Here we have a Daily Mail story about one of the whistleblowers who spoke at Dr. Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project press conference at the weekend and spoke at the press conference on Monday. So in this Daily Mail story, let's go have a quick look at that. So there he is. There's a picture of Michael Herrera. He was a US Marine, and he describes being part of a squad of 6 that went into the interior of Indonesia, one of the, I think it might have been Java, the main island there in Indonesia, after the big earthquake and the tidal wave in 2009. And they were there to render humanitarian assistance, and they stumbled upon this ARV, this alien reproduction vehicle that was floating, and they saw it being loaded with weapons and possibly drugs. Now, they described how their squad of 6 was then intercepted by 8 black-clad soldiers with advanced weapons who essentially kind of like held them at gunpoint, disarmed Herrera's squad, and threatened their lives. Now, what I found about well, there are a few significant takeaways from this. One is that this again is an example of one of the witnesses that Greer had at his press conference that wasn't read in and accidentally stumbled upon a UFO UAP project. And so in this case, he saw weapons and possibly drugs being loaded onto this ARV. And so this is something that is very significant, that some of these reverse engineered spacecraft are involved in illicit trafficking of weapons, drugs, and possibly young adults. I have to be careful of the words I use here. This is YouTube. So these young adults, or let's just say before adulthood, that period before adulthood, and people prior to adulthood are trafficked, these ARVs are possibly involved in that as well. But we know drug running and weapons trade. And that's very significant because this is how a lot of money is raised off the books. Because if you're going to have a vast infrastructure of reverse engineering of alien spacecraft, building fleets of these spacecraft for your secret space programs, building vast underground complexes where all of this is happening, that's going to take a lot of money. and that's not something that you can just siphon through the US Congress in terms of appropriations, because Congress already does that. Congress approves the intelligence community budget every year, which is roughly around $80 billion. And that gets siphoned through the Pentagon and gets distributed to the different intelligence agencies, the NRO, the CIA, the NSA, and so forth. Now, one of the things is that is called the official black budget, because Congress has an idea of how big that is because of the money that goes through all of these kind of fictitious line items in the Department of Defense annual budget, the National Defense Authorization Act. So Congress can kind of chart that, because it knows that in the Pentagon there are a lot of these line items that appear that are fictitious, and members of Congress know that, and that's how various researchers have been over the years been able to estimate the size of the official black budget. But there's an unofficial black budget, and that is done through the CIA. And I wrote a big report about that in 2003 on exopolitics.org, called the Black Budget Report. So if you go to exopolitics.org, go to my recommended papers, you'll see in 2003 there was a big report. I think it was a 15,000 word report on the black budget, and it described how this is all done. So here we have Herrera seeing a craft involved in these kinds of black budget activities, trafficking weapons and arms to raise money for the black budget, which is then filtered through the Pentagon and goes into these various ARV projects, dumb facilities all over the planet. So Herrera's testimony very significant, because another source on the illicit black budget, and also gives us a clue. And one of the things that I found very interesting in listening to Herrera's report about those black uniform clad soldiers with the advanced weapons is that JP, the Army whistleblower that I'm working with, who's active at the moment, he describes going on missions where he is given a black uniform. He calls it an OCP. That's the occupational camouflage pattern. So he's given an OCP, which is a black uniform, very similar to what Herrera described, and he's also given an advanced weapon, which is a step up from the standard issue M4 or whatever weapon that is used by the military. And that was one of the things that Herrera witnessed, that he said that these black-clad soldiers, this team of 8, they had these weapons which were more advanced than the standard issue Marine weapon that he was issued, which is what JP reports is actually happening. So in a way, this kind of like corroborates what JP has said about his own participation as part of these teams that go off and do various missions. So clearly this team's goal was to protect this ARV during its operations. JP's missions have been very different, but sometimes they have involved protection. So JP could, in theory, be called away, or could one day perform one of the very missions that Michael Herrera reported on, that JP could in future be part of that team of 8 watching over or protecting a facility when a squad of soldiers like Herrera's kind of inadvertently stumbles in. So I thought that was very important to mention. Okay, let's go to the next story. Okay, I was interviewed on Redacted on June 12th, and I thought that was great.
Coming forward to confirm what.
And so you could watch that interview on Redacted, and it is titled, "This is the second phase of UFO disclosure." And what Clayton Morris was trying to do there was to introduce his audience to the next phase, that it's not just a matter of, okay, these UAPs are real. It's not just a matter that these UAPs are being reverse engineered. You go to the next phase is that you got to start looking at the secret space programs. What are these ARVs used in? And it's very interesting, looking at the feedback on that story in Redacted. There was, of course, a lot of people that were very, very favorable. They were like, saying, "Fantastic, this is great. Glad you had Salla on." But there was a lot of people that were saying, "No, this isn't real. This is just a lot of BS. Why are you doing this, Clayton?" And so it shows how a kind of mainstream audience still is largely unprepared for this. And I kind of congratulate Clayton for taking that step of introducing this information to his audience, a lot of whom are ready for this, but there's still a very significant proportion of the audience that is not ready. I mean, that's the fact. I mean, a lot of people are still not ready because, there is that kind of like intrinsic human bias that, well, if this was ready, if this was real, I would have known about this because, I'm a tenured professor, or I have a security clearance, or, I have friends that work with the NRO, or read into kind of various compartmented projects with the NSA. And if this was real, I would have known about it. Well, they don't know about it because this has been so well compartmentalized. So definitely take a look at Redacted. There will be more interviews in the future with Clayton, but I think there is going to still be a lot of catch up there with his audience. But I'm very glad that Clayton is educating his audience to the reality of this, because there are different phases here. I mean, the reverse engineering of crashed UFOs is one phase. The next is the secret space programs that have been built with these technologies. And then the next phase is the contact with extraterrestrials. What kind of contacts have been made? How are extraterrestrials involved in these secret space programs, in these reverse engineering programs? How are extraterrestrials involved in developing and using the portal systems that are part of how these different space programs operate? All of those are difficult things for people who have just kind of like just discovering this material. So, I think that this is where Redacted plays an important role. And, Stephen Greer, his press conference, I think that was very, very useful for people who are largely unaware of this reverse engineering or of these ARVs existing and operating out there. So Greer is trying to educate his audience. Now, I don't agree with everything Stephen Greer does. He doesn't agree with everything I do, but I think what he does is help people get to those kind of like initial steps of understanding that these ARVs have been built secretly, that they are classified at a very high level. When it comes to the development of secret space programs and to extraterrestrials, Greer and I kind of like have very strong differences of opinion, but nevertheless, I think he does some good work in preparing people for those kind of like more developed aspects of what's going on. Okay, so yeah, that's the interview with Redacted. Definitely go have a look at that. Next, on June 13, Pathways to the Future, Super Soldiers and Ascended Masters trailer for my June 24 webinar. So here's a 5-minute trailer to my upcoming webinar. So let me play a little bit of that for you. Let's just do that.
From the dawn of human history, extraterrestrial visitors have biologically altered indigenous hominids found on Earth to create avatar bodies which could accommodate their souls to become the rulers and gods of early civilizations. They were often described as giants. These visitors also created lesser bodies for worker laborers, artisans, architects, and engineers, and crafted enhanced bodies for a warrior super soldier class. Many genetically modified super soldiers would become technologically enhanced cyborgs for the wars fought between different extraterrestrial factions competing over territory, resources, and influence on Earth or off-planet. The classic Vedic Indian epic, the Mahabharata.
Okay, so that's just to kind of like give you a little bit of an idea of what I'm going to be talking about at my upcoming webinar on June 24. And I think this creation of super soldiers is very important because we are witnessing. We know from various whistleblower reports that the super soldiers have been trained using MK Ultra, that they are involved in these secret space programs, and this is something that has been revealed by quite a number of insiders that have been used as super soldiers. Jean-Charles Moyen is one of these super soldiers that was part of the secret space program, and he has reported on how enhanced, kind of like in terms of equipment and also physiologically enhanced. So you have genetic alterations and you have technological alterations. So this is something that is already happening, and I think that in the future that's going to become much more prevalent. That as we move into a post-disclosure world, we are going to move from people as civilians being recruited into whatever it's the Army, the Air Force, Navy, and so forth, being recruited as soldiers and being trained in combat operations, the special forces in particular, soldiers that are recruited into those programs. This kind of genetic enhancement, this kind of technological enhancement is going to become much more prevalent. And of course, we have the things like Neuralink, chips that kind of like can be embedded into the brain, which gives one a kind of like 24/7 connection to the internet and can cognitively improve performance. Now, I think it's pretty clear that anyone that joins the military, especially in a combat position or joins special forces, that they are very likely to be expected to undergo medical procedures where they get technologically and genetically enhanced. So I think that is coming. And on the other hand, in a post-disclosure world, I think that there's going to be a lot more information being revealed about something I call ascended mastery, which is where people are able to access that kind of inner potential that they have to connect with the universe, with oneness, if you like. And as a consequence of that, they develop something called the cities. Now, in India in particular, because the Indians are probably the most developed as far as people who are able to self-realize, achieve a sense of cosmic unity. They call it nirvana, and the Indians describe people who achieve these higher states of consciousness develop these cities or these incredible psychic abilities, teleportation, the ability for telekinesis, the dematerialization, telepathy, precognition, all of these amazing abilities which are over and above what can be achieved in a laboratory through technological and genetic enhancements. So these individuals who achieve these higher states of consciousness, to all intents and purposes, they become like Jedi Knights. And I think that's truly where we're going. I mean, I think when you look at the Star Wars movies, where you had, who was doing all the fighting? It was these genetically enhanced, technologically enhanced soldiers, droids, AI, clones, on the one side, typically fighting for the Empire. And on the other side, you had these Jedi Knights, who were these ascended masters. So ascended mastery is the future for many of us who are cognizant of the big picture and want to develop our inherent abilities and to be able to work and collaborate with extraterrestrials. And to do that, to be able to work and collaborate with extraterrestrials, you simply have to develop higher consciousness. I mean, it can't be done without it. I mean, as a civilian, you could interact with extraterrestrials, but you can be very easily overwhelmed. So I think ascended mastery is the most desirable pathway. And so in my webinar, I'm going to be talking about that, about those two paths and why we need to choose wisely which path we and our families should choose. Okay, so here's here's the upcoming Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection Conference that's going to be held in October. I am very glad that I'll be going to that. This will be my only conference appearance in 2023. I made the conscious decision last year that I wasn't going to be doing conferences regularly anymore, that I decided I would just put my energies into webinars for a number of reasons. There's the travel requirement is so much less hassle, and it's much safer. And that's a big consideration for me now. I need to be very cognizant of my safety, and working out of home, doing webinars is actually a way for me to be able to safely present the information without being exposed to things. Because I know Elena Denan, who I work with closely, JP, Jean-Charles Moyen, we've all been targeted. We have all been targeted, and there have been assassination attempts. And we haven't talked about that simply because we don't want to kind of give energy to the forces doing that. So working from home, doing webinars is a great way for me to get the word out. But I make an exception for this conference in Orlando once a year, because this is a gathering of the family, of the galactic family. And if you were there last year, it was a fantastic event. And I hope you join this year. Elena, Jean-Charles, there'll be a number of others there that are going to be really giving you some important information. Tony Rodriguez will be there. Some others, some new people, Karina Pataki that I just interviewed. She will also be there. Danny Henderson, of course, and Alex Collier will be part of the audience as well. So definitely worth coming to that. And my friend JP, let's just say that he's also going to look at that, or be involved in that conference in some capacity. And I can't say more than that. Okay, so here we move to June 14. That was, what was that, Wednesday, I believe. Tucker Carlson did a story about why the deep state targeted Donald Trump, because he did not support the perpetual war policies that fund the military-industrial complex, precisely what President Eisenhower warned about. Tucker's next step is to okay, so I think Tucker Carlson is absolutely correct. One of the things that I liked about Donald Trump's candidacy in 2016 was his efforts to try and promote dialogue with Russia. and to promote dialogue with North Korea, and to question the existence of NATO. NATO is an aggressive military alliance, and it was very good to hear Trump doing that. And when Carlson said that became the key element in why Trump was targeted by the deep state, and now we know that from the Durham report that the whole Russia collusion narrative was contrived, that it was contrived by the Clinton campaign, and that it was aided and abetted by the FBI and the intelligence community, the CIA in particular, aided and abetted that. And, not only did that form an albatross around Trump's presidency, but more importantly, in my opinion, it made Russia a target and led to Russia being forced into eventually taking the actions it did in Ukraine, because it felt that the West was simply not interested and was really gunning for war. So Tucker Carlson, I think he did a good job in identifying what it is about Trump's support of the military-industrial complex. And what I look forward to in terms of Tucker Carlson and his new Twitter show is that eventually he connects this perpetual war machine to the black budget funding of extraterrestrial reverse engineering projects and secret space programs. And so now Avi Loeb's Galileo project has begun its first expedition to search for remnants of an interstellar object that crashed in the Pacific Ocean, an event confirmed by the US military. So Avi Loeb was able to track what he believed to be an interstellar object that he thinks is alien technology that crashed into the Pacific Ocean. And several years ago, he communicated with, I can't remember if it's the Navy or which military service he communicated with, but they confirmed that there was an interstellar object. We're not talking about a meteor from our solar system. We're talking about an interstellar object that crashed in the Pacific Ocean, somewhere in the region of Papua New Guinea. So Loeb has gotten funding to be able to send an expedition there to find remnants of this interstellar objects that he believes is alien technology. So is this object going to be, are they going to find remnants of alien technology, or are they just going to find remnants of a meteor? Well, I think that's a very interesting question. I believe that what Loeb is doing with the Galileo project is prepping people for what is coming, that extraterrestrials are real, that they have been visiting us, that extraterrestrial technologies have been cited, and of course that opens the door to the exopolitical literature, which is that some of these craft have crashed, they've been reverse engineered, and so forth. So yeah, very interesting exopolitical development, because now universities, think tanks, mainstream media are all looking much more closely at this data concerning extraterrestrials, UFOs being real. And I just want to kind of point out that right now, this has never happened before. We have 3 independent investigations of UFOs, UAPs happening right now. One is the investigation headed by Sean Kirkpatrick, the Arrow investigation, which is under the Pentagon. A second is an investigation that is being conducted by NASA into UAPs, and recently there was last week there was a hearing on by NASA on UAPs where they talked about the data, and thirdly there is a White House UAP task force that is being headed by the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. So that's 3 UAP or UFO investigations that are happening concurrently. You go back 3 years, there were none. And the UFO issue was considered to be a subject of ridicule, not a national security threat. Now they are deemed an important national security threat. And why? So why set up 3 bodies? It's because the deep state is playing catch up. They're playing catch up. They're getting people ready for the big reveals that are coming, that I've been talking about for the last few years now. That space arks, motherships are going to start revealing themselves soon. Right now, we've got orbs that are flying around, UFOs, UAPs that are flying around, that are extraterrestrial or corporate built, more and more of these that are flying around. But the motherships, the space arks, are going to be showing themselves soon. And so this is something that the deep state is worried about. And so, yeah, they're playing catch up, and they're getting everyone ready for this. And they want to get ahead of the story. Okay, so here's a interview I did that came out on Thursday, June 15, investigating alien interrogation and autopsy videos, an interview with Jon Stewart. And in there, we discussed 4 alien interviews or interrogation videos that have been circulating for many, many years. And one is the video concerning this Victor, the alien that was interviewed at this S4 or S2 facility at Area 51 sometime in the 1990s. That video came out, and you can see in the top right-hand corner here, you see a picture of this alien being interviewed. There are also videos of Skinny Bob, and let me just, there you go, Skinny Bob, that's the video of Skinny Bob. Okay, and you can see the suit he's wearing, the clothing he's wearing. It's human clothing. Now, some people say that this is a Mertha extraterrestrial, a positive being that Elena Danaan has described. So why would it be wearing human clothing? Well, this is because extraterrestrials that arrive here often request or are given human clothing. So that's the Skinny Bob video, just to give you an idea of that one. There is also the alien autopsy video, and then there is this alien interrogation video that is also circulating out there. Okay, so we have 4 different videos of aliens being interrogated or interviewed, and so Jon Stewart has been doing research on this issue for many years, as has another, and Jon Stewart has been researching the alien interview of Victor at the S2 facility for a number. He first became familiar with that in 1996. He says he began seriously investigating it in 2016. I've since found out that, or been reminded, I was aware of this, that there is also a gentleman from England, Andrew Burlington, who also has been researching the Victor alien video for significantly longer than that. So I think his research began in the 90s as well, and he came out with a video where he talks about the authenticity of the Victor alien interview. So that, according to Burlington and according to Jon Stewart, is correct. When it comes to the Skinny Bob video, Jon Stewart thinks that it may be credible. I interviewed John Vivanco and asked him about the Skinny Bob video, and John Vivanco said that yes, it is authentic. Then we have the alien autopsy video that apparently that is authentic according to Stewart. And I think that it is either authentic or it is a recreation of an authentic autopsy video. So I'm going to be following up on this. I've asked some people who have been working on the alien autopsy video, Sean David Morton. I've asked him to come back on Exopolitics Today to kind of give us his take on that particular video. And finally, this alien interrogation video that I mentioned at the end with that being, Stuart thought that was a fake, and I thought so too, just looking at the dialogue. But some people think it's real. It's definitely got a lot of views. I think it was 7 million views on YouTube. So there's that Jon Stewart video. You can look at that. And today, I just put out a notice on Twitter, 7 days to go to my webinar. So next week on Saturday, you can register for that webinar. That's a great way of supporting my exopolitics research. So thank you for that if you do register. But I will do another week in review next week. So we'll get to hear about the coming week events. I think this is a major turning point in human affairs, what we are witnessing around us. Things are starting to happen at a breakneck speed, so I'm very glad that you can be here to watch this. So I want to thank you for being a part of Exopolitics Today and supporting my research.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.